Sharon Stone had counted 18 years in darkness. Her father, a four-star Marine general who'd never lost a battle, had flown in 73 specialists from 12 countries. Each one failed. Then a rookie nurse named Melinda walked into that hospital room, and every doctor in the building told her father to fire her. What they didn't know was that Melinda had seen something in Sharon's eyes that $2 million worth of specialists had missed. When she pulled out a simple medical tool and did what she'd only seen once in her childhood, Sharon's scream echoed down the hall. The general dropped to his knees. And those doctors? They couldn't even look him in the eye. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The sound of coffee brewing at 0600 hours was Sharon Stone's sunrise. It had been for 6,570 days. 18 years measured not in calendar pages, but in the reliable rhythm of her father's footsteps descending the stairs. 13 steps, each one memorized, each one a promise that morning had come again. She stood at the kitchen counter of their home on the Marine base, her fingers tracing the Braille labels she'd placed on every jar, every container, every surface that mattered. Her world was organized with military precision, though she'd laugh and tell you it was survival, not genetics. The coffee pot beeped. 3 short pulses. She'd programmed it that way because 2 pulses sounded too much like a microwave, and 4 felt excessive. 3 was just right. Morning, Sharon. Her father's voice came from exactly where she knew it would. The doorway, 7 feet to her left, where he always paused to watch her, to make sure she was okay, though he'd never admit it. Morning, Dad. Black, 2 sugars, already poured. She turned, holding out his mug with the kind of casual confidence that came from practice, years and years of practice. Their fingers touched as he took it, and she felt the calluses that matched the weight in his voice. You're going to make me predictable, he said, settling into his chair, the one that creaked slightly on the left side. Everything in Sharon's life had a sound signature, a story, a place. You made yourself predictable 18 years ago, she replied, moving to the table with her own mug. Herbal tea, chamomile, in the cup with the chipped handle she could identify by touch. Routine keeps you sane, you said. Structure prevents chaos. Your words, General. She heard him smile. You could hear smiles, if you paid attention. They changed the shape of breath, the quality of silence that followed. Sharon's fingers found the Braille reader beside her plate. An article from the Journal of Neuroscience she'd been working through. She was 3 semesters into a psychology degree at Georgetown, completed entirely through audio lectures and tactile materials. Her professors kept telling her she was their top student. She'd shrug and say she had fewer distractions than most. No Instagram, no Netflix binges. Just pure, focused listening to voices teaching her how the human mind worked, how consciousness built meaning from sensation, how people constructed entire worlds from fragments of information. The irony wasn't lost on her. What's today's reading? Her father asked, the question part of their morning ritual, his way of staying connected to her world. Neuroplasticity in sensory-deprived individuals, she said, running her fingers across the raised dots, reading faster than most people could process printed text. Turns out my brain reorganized itself. Visual cortex processing sound and touch now. I'm basically a superhero, Dad. Just not the kind with a movie franchise. She felt him watching her. The weight of his gaze was something she'd always been able to sense, not mystically, just practically. Fathers who've been watching for 18 years carry a specific quality of attention. Love mixed with helplessness, pride tangled with pain. You are remarkable, he said quietly, and in those 3 words, she heard all the things he never said, all the specialists he'd called, all the hope he'd carried and buried, all the rage at an enemy he couldn't defeat with strategy or strength. I'm adapted, Sharon corrected gently, her fingers pausing on the page. There's a difference, Dad. Remarkable is a choice. Adapted is just what happens when you don't have options. The silence between them held 18 years of unspoken truths. She'd learned to live without sight. He'd never learned to live with it. Outside, the base was waking up. She heard reveille in the distance, the sound of boots on pavement, the world stirring into its daily routine. Her world had different boundaries. The walls she knew by heart, the paths she'd memorized, the 4-block radius of independence she'd negotiated with a father who saw danger in every corner she couldn't see coming. She'd made peace with her darkness. He never had. But Sharon had no idea that in exactly 4 hours, a stranger would walk into her life and change everything she'd ever known about darkness. She had no idea that her father's war, the one he'd been fighting since the day she was born, was about to reach a battlefield neither of them expected. She simply finished her tea, kissed her father on the cheek, and prepared for another day of the beautiful, limited, completely manageable life she'd built from 18 years of night. Some endings arrive quietly. Some arrive disguised as ordinary mornings. This one arrived with a rookie nurse named Melinda. General Marcus Stone had commanded Marines through 3 combat deployments. He'd planned operations across 4 continents, coordinated intelligence networks that spanned 12 time zones, and made decisions that determined whether men came home or stayed behind. He understood strategy. He understood resources. He understood that every problem had a solution if you gathered the right intelligence, deployed the right assets, and refused to accept defeat. But some enemies don't wear uniforms. Specialist number 1 arrived when Sharon was 3 months old. Dr. Elizabeth Chun from Boston Children's Hospital, ranked among the top pediatric ophthalmologists in the world. The general treated it like a military operation. He'd assembled Sharon's medical files like mission briefings. He'd researched Chin's publications, her success rates, her experimental approaches. He'd flown her in on a private jet, cleared her schedule for a week, provided her with every resource she requested. In the examination room, he'd stood at attention, as if discipline alone could will a different outcome. Dr. Chun had been kind, thorough, honest. Congenital optic nerve hypoplasia, she'd said, her voice carrying the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered unbearable news regularly. The optic nerves didn't develop properly in utero. I'm sorry, General. There's nothing to operate on. Nothing to correct. Your daughter will never see. But the general had heard never before. On battlefields. In strategy rooms. From politicians who said missions were impossible. Never just meant you hadn't found the right approach yet. So he found specialist number 2. Then 3. Then 7. He approached Sharon's blindness the way he'd approach any campaign. With relentless, systematic determination. If American specialists couldn't help, he'd go international. He built a database. He tracked emerging research. He cold-called laboratories in Switzerland and clinics in Singapore. His contacts in military intelligence helped him identify cutting-edge programs before they published results. Money wasn't an obstacle. Neither was geography. Neither was protocol. By the time Sharon was 7 years old, specialist number 23 walked into their home. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka from Tokyo University Hospital, pioneering work in stem cell optic regeneration. The general remembered that consultation differently than the others. Sharon had been old enough to understand, old enough to hope, old enough to ask questions in her small, clear voice. Will I be able to see colors? Will I know what my daddy looks like? Dr. Tanaka had run his tests with meticulous care. He'd reviewed scans. He'd consulted with colleagues across 3 continents. And then he'd said what they all eventually said, in different languages, with different technical terms, but always the same fundamental truth. I'm sorry. The architecture simply isn't there. The general had watched his daughter's small shoulders drop, watched her nod with the terrible wisdom of a child learning that some wishes don't come true, and something had shifted in him that day. Hope had become something sharper, more desperate. Specialist 52 arrived when Sharon was 13. Dr. Youssef Rahman from Johns Hopkins, breakthrough research in bioengineered retinal tissue. The general had stopped sleeping well by then. He'd filled notebooks with research, medical terminology he'd taught himself, questions for doctors who were running out of gentle ways to tell him no. His fellow officers noticed the obsession. His commander suggested he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. The general had replied that surrender wasn't in his vocabulary. Dr. Rahman had spent 3 days examining Sharon, the most thorough evaluation yet. And on the final day, he placed his hand on the general's shoulder and said, "Sir, with respect, you're chasing ghosts. The condition is simply incompatible with sight. Every specialist you've consulted has told you the same thing. At some point, you have to let your daughter live her life instead of chasing a cure that doesn't exist." But the general wouldn't stop, because stopping meant accepting that his daughter would live in darkness forever. That all his power, all his resources, all his determination meant nothing against the cruelty of biology. Specialist number 73 walked into Walter Reed Medical Center 2 weeks ago. Dr. Marcus Henley, just returned from a fellowship in Geneva, supposedly working on genetic therapies that were years ahead of current practice. The general had arranged the consultation through channels that bypassed normal waiting lists. He'd arrived with Sharon, with updated scans, with 18 years of documentation from 72 previous specialists. Dr. Henley had reviewed everything, had run his own tests, had consulted the literature, and then he delivered his verdict with the kind of finality that even the general couldn't argue against. Sir, I've read every report in this file. I've examined your daughter myself, and I need to be direct with you. Continuing to pursue treatment at this point isn't hope. It's denial. 72 specialists before me have reached the same conclusion. Your daughter's optic nerve hypoplasia is complete and bilateral. There is no corrective procedure. There is no emerging therapy. There is no cure. I'm sorry, but you need to accept this. The general had stood in his study that night, surrounded by commendations and medals that proved he'd won every battle that mattered, except this one. 18 years, 73 specialists, millions of dollars. Countless miles traveled, and his daughter would still never see his face. For the first time in his military career, General Marcus Stone understood defeat. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the answer wasn't in Geneva or Johns Hopkins or Tokyo. It wasn't in cutting-edge research or experimental therapies or genetic engineering. The answer was in a small memory from rural Georgia, carried by a nurse who hadn't even been born when his war began. A nurse who would walk into Walter Reed Medical Center in exactly 3 hours and 52 minutes. But first, he'd agreed to one more consultation. Not for himself, for Sharon. Because she'd asked him to. Because even at 18, she was still trying to protect him from his own hope. One more specialist. One more examination. And then, she'd said, they could both finally rest. If you've ever watched someone fight for someone they love, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next proves that sometimes the biggest battles are won by the smallest acts of courage. Trolls won't understand that, but you will. The general drove to Walter Reed that morning carrying 18 years of defeat. He had no idea he was driving toward the only victory that had ever truly mattered. Melinda Harris checked her reflection one more time before leaving her apartment that morning, smoothing the crisp new scrubs that still had creases from the package. 24 years old. Nursing degree exactly 6 weeks old. First day at Walter Reed Medical Center, one of the most prestigious military hospitals in the country. Her hands were shaking as she pinned her name badge to her chest, the laminated card that felt both like an achievement and an imposter's costume. She'd graduated in the top 15% of her class. She'd completed her clinicals with commendations. She'd passed her licensing exam on the first attempt. None of that mattered the moment she walked through those hospital doors, because in the hierarchy of medical institutions, a rookie nurse ranked somewhere between invisible and inconvenient. The senior nurse at the station, Patricia Monroe, 23 years at Walter Reed, gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, glanced up from her paperwork with the expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 eager young nurses come and go. You're the new girl. Harris, right? Yes, ma'am. Melinda Harris. I'm assigned to. I know what you're assigned to. Patricia's tone wasn't cruel, just efficiently dismissive. You'll shadow Nurse Chin today. Don't touch anything. Don't suggest anything. And for God's sake, don't try to impress anyone. We've got actual doctors for that. She returned to her paperwork as if Melinda had already disappeared. The morning proceeded exactly as Melinda had feared. She followed Nurse Chun, a woman who moved through the ward with the brisk confidence of someone who'd forgotten what uncertainty felt like, and tried to make herself useful while remaining invisible. She fetched supplies. She observed procedures. She asked careful questions that were answered with varying degrees of patience. The doctors didn't make eye contact. The other nurses offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Everyone was busy. Everyone was important. Everyone had earned their place. Everyone except Melinda. At 10:47, Patricia called her back to the station with the casual authority of someone assigning a task beneath notice. We've got a VIP patient in 347. General's daughter. 18 years old, congenitally blind. Here for yet another consultation that won't change anything. She handed Melinda a tablet without looking up. Your job is simple. Keep her comfortable. Make sure she has water. Be polite. Don't engage in medical discussions. The specialists handle the actual medicine. You're basically hospitality. Think you can manage that? Melinda took the tablet, feeling the weight of dismissal in every word. Yes, ma'am. Room 347. Keep her comfortable. And Harris. Patricia finally looked up, her expression carrying a warning Melinda didn't fully understand yet. The general is military royalty. His daughter has been seen by every specialist worth their degree. Whatever you think you know about nursing, whatever you learned in school, set it aside. Your job is to not make waves. Understood? Understood. But as Melinda sat in the empty staff lounge an hour later, scrolling through Sharon Stone's medical file on the tablet, she felt something unsettling taking root in her chest. The file was massive. 18 years of consultations, 73 different specialists, hundreds of tests and scans and evaluations. She read through examination notes from doctors whose names she recognized from textbooks. She reviewed diagnoses written in technical language she had to look up on her phone. Congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. Bilateral. Complete. Irreversible. Every specialist agreed. Every test confirmed it. Every conclusion was identical. But Melinda carried a secret. A memory from when she was 9 years old, sitting in her mother's small clinic in rural Georgia, watching through a doorway she wasn't supposed to be watching through. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Harris, a country doctor who treated farmers and factory workers and families who paid in cash or casseroles, examining a woman who'd come in complaining of cloudy vision. Melinda remembered her mother's hands, steady and certain, working with an instrument that looked too simple for the miracle that followed. She remembered the woman's gasp, the tears, the way her mother had smiled and said something about membranes and how sometimes the simplest problems hid behind the most complicated symptoms. Melinda had been 9 years old. The memory was nearly 15 years old now, softened by time, possibly distorted by a child's limited understanding. She'd never asked her mother about it afterward. She'd filed it away as one of those moments from childhood that seemed significant but probably wasn't. Except now, sitting in this hospital lounge, reading about Sharon Stone's eyes, something about that memory was surfacing, pushing against her consciousness like a word on the tip of her tongue. A recognition she couldn't quite name. It was probably nothing. It was almost certainly nothing. She was a rookie nurse 6 weeks out of school, reading a file compiled by specialists whose collective experience spanned centuries. What could she possibly see that they had missed? But the memory wouldn't settle. It kept circling back, insistent and uncomfortable. A memory that would either save her career or destroy it before it even started. Melinda closed the tablet and stood up, smoothing her scrubs again, trying to quiet the voice in her head that was growing louder with every passing minute. She had a job to do. A simple job. Keep the patient comfortable. Don't make waves. Don't overstep. She could do that. She would do that. When Melinda finally walked into room 347 at 12:53, carrying a fresh pitcher of water and wearing her most professional smile, she had no idea that the next 7 minutes would change 3 lives forever. She had no idea that the instinct she was trying so hard to ignore was the only thing standing between Sharon Stone and a lifetime of unnecessary darkness. She only knew that something in that medical file didn't feel right. And sometimes, feeling is more important than knowing. Sharon was sitting by the window when Melinda entered, her face turned toward sunlight she couldn't see but could feel. She looked younger than 18, small-framed, dark hair pulled back, wearing a Georgetown sweatshirt. Her eyes were open, unfocused, moving slightly as she listened to the world rather than watched it. "Hi," Melinda said softly. "I'm Melinda. I'll be your nurse today." Sharon turned toward her voice and smiled, not politely, but genuinely. Finally, someone who doesn't whisper. "Do you know how exhausting it is when everyone treats blind people like glass?" They talked while Melinda checked vitals. About Sharon's psychology degree. About nursing school. About the bizarre assumptions people made. Sharon was sharp, funny, disarmingly honest. This wasn't VIP patient and rookie nurse. This was just 2 young women finding unexpected connection in a sterile room. The door opened. General Marcus Stone filled the doorway with presence that didn't require a uniform, though he wore one anyway, decorated with ribbons that spoke of decades. His eyes found his daughter first, assessing, protective, then moved to Melinda with evaluative precision. "General Stone," Melinda said, standing straighter. "I'm Nurse Harris." He nodded once, economical and tired. "Up close, She could see what Rank tried to hide. 18 years of exhaustion. Lines around his eyes. Gray at his temples. Weight that had nothing to do with military service. The specialist will be here shortly, he said, voice practiced and neutral. Dr. Morrison. Highly recommended. Though they all are. The resignation in those last words broke something in Melinda's chest. Dr. Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, mid-50s, confident, thorough. He examined Sharon with professional efficiency, reviewing scans, murmuring technical observations. Melinda stood in the corner, doing what she'd been told. Stay quiet, stay invisible, don't overstep. But when Dr. Morrison stepped back, when Sharon sat patiently with her unseeing eyes reflecting overhead lights, Melinda found herself moving forward. May I? She asked, gesturing toward the penlight. Standard nursing documentation. It wasn't standard. It wasn't necessary. But Dr. Morrison shrugged, and Sharon said, sure, why not? And suddenly Melinda was standing there with a penlight and her heart hammering. Look straight ahead, Melinda said softly. This might be bright. She adjusted the ophthalmoscope, peering into Sharon's right eye, and saw it. A thin, translucent layer. Cloudy. Irregular. Sitting on the retina's surface like a veil over something that should be visible underneath. The room tilted. Melinda was 9 years old again, hiding behind the door of her mother's clinic in rural Georgia on a summer afternoon. Mrs. Henderson from the school cafeteria sat in the examination chair, describing how everything had gone foggy, how colors had faded. Her mother examined Mrs. Henderson's eyes with this same ophthalmoscope, made a small sound of recognition, said something about an epiretinal membrane, a thin layer of tissue that clouded vision like plastic wrap over a lens. Melinda remembered watching her mother explain the procedure. Simple, she'd said. Delicate, but simple. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Henderson was crying because she could see the clock, could count her fingers, could see her own reflection. Just a membrane, her mother had said afterward. Sometimes the simplest problems hide behind complicated symptoms. Sometimes you just have to trust what you see over what you're told you should see. Melinda moved to Sharon's left eye, needing to confirm, praying she was wrong, terrified she was right. The same cloudy layer. The same translucent veil. The same correctable, treatable, reversible condition that had nothing to do with optic nerve hypoplasia. Sharon Stone had membranes covering her retinas. Membranes that could be removed. Membranes that 73 specialists had somehow, impossibly missed. Melinda's heart was racing. She knew what she was seeing. But if she was wrong, if this was rookie overconfidence, if her childhood memory was distorted, she'd lose everything. Her job, her credibility, her career before it started. And if she was right, 73 specialists would be proven wrong. The general's 18-year war would have been fought against a phantom enemy, while the real one sat visible, removable, fixable this entire time. She stepped back, clicking off the penlight with trembling fingers. Dr. Morrison reviewed his notes. The general watched his daughter, expecting nothing to change. Sharon sat quietly, unaware her entire life might have just pivoted. Melinda needed to tell someone. Had to speak up. Had to say what she'd seen even though every instinct screamed she'd be dismissed, destroyed. She had to tell someone. But who would believe her? Dr. Raymond Kellerman was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station when Melinda found him. 52 years old, chief of ophthalmology at Walter Reed for 11 years, with a reputation that preceded him like armor. He'd trained at Johns Hopkins, published in every journal that mattered, consulted on cases that made medical history. He was exactly the kind of doctor rookie nurses were taught to respect from a distance. Melinda's hands were still shaking when she approached. Dr. Kellerman, I need to speak with you about Sharon Stone. He didn't look up from his tablet. The general's daughter is being handled by Dr. Morrison. If there's a comfort issue, address it with the senior nurse. It's not a comfort issue. It's medical. I examined her eyes and I saw. Now he looked up. His expression wasn't angry, just mildly surprised, the way you'd look at a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. You've been here for what, 6 hours? And you examined a patient's eyes? He set down his tablet with deliberate slowness. Did Dr. Morrison request your clinical assessment? No, but then why? Exactly. Were you performing an ophthalmological examination? The nurse's station had gone quiet. 3 senior nurses stopped their work, listening. Patricia Monroe's expression said I warned you. Melinda forced steadiness into her voice. I saw something. A cloudy layer on both retinas. It looks like an epiretinal membrane. I think. You think. Dr. Kellerman's voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. Let me understand this correctly. You, a nurse with 6 weeks of experience, examined a patient who's been evaluated by 73 specialists over 18 years, and you believe you've identified a condition that every single one of them missed. I know how it sounds. Do you? He stood now, and the shift in posture changed everything. This wasn't a doctor humoring a nurse anymore. This was hierarchy being enforced. Do you know how it sounds to suggest that specialists from Boston Children's, Johns Hopkins, Tokyo University Hospital, physicians who've dedicated their entire careers to ophthalmology, all somehow overlooked a basic membrane? Do you understand what you're actually saying? I'm saying I saw something that matches. You saw what you wanted to see, or what you think you saw based on inadequate training and dangerous overconfidence. His voice hardened. Sharon Stone has congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. It's been confirmed by 73 independent evaluations. The diagnosis is not in question. What is in question is your judgment. Melinda felt heat rising in her face, but she held her ground. Dr. Kellerman, if there's even a possibility. There isn't. He picked up his tablet again, a gesture of dismissal. This is a teaching moment, Nurse Harris. Medicine is not about hunches. It's not about what you think you remember from wherever you trained. It's about evidence, expertise, and understanding your limitations. Your limitation is that you are a rookie nurse. Stay in your lane. But Melinda didn't move. Couldn't move. Because she kept seeing that cloudy layer, kept remembering Mrs. Henderson counting her fingers, kept hearing her mother's voice saying, "Trust what you see." With respect, Doctor, I know what I saw. And if I'm wrong, you can fire me. But if I'm right, and we do nothing. If you're right. Dr. Kellerman's calm finally cracked. Do you have any idea what you're suggesting? The liability alone. Claiming we missed something for 18 years? The professional implications? He stopped himself, and when he continued, his voice was cold precision. I'm going to say this once. You will not discuss this theory with anyone. Not the patient. Not her father. Not your fellow nurses. You will continue your assigned duties without overstepping again. Or you will leave. Those are your options. The silence that followed felt like suffocation. Comment, trust your instinct, if you've ever been dismissed by someone who should have listened. Because Melinda is about to make a choice that will define her entire life. But Dr. Kellerman wasn't finished. Actually, let's make this official. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Conference room B, 15 minutes. I want the senior staff to hear this directly so there's no confusion about protocol moving forward. Patricia Monroe's expression shifted from vindication to something almost like sympathy. The other nurses found reasons to be elsewhere, and Melinda understood with sudden, crystalline clarity what was happening. Dr. Kellerman didn't just dismiss her. He called a meeting. And when Melinda walked into that conference room 15 minutes later, facing 5 senior physicians and the hospital's chief administrator, she realized she wasn't just fighting for Sharon anymore. She was fighting for her career, her credibility, her future. She had 2 choices: back down and survive, or stand her ground and risk everything she'd worked for. The thing about choices is they define you long after the moment passes. Melinda took a breath and sat down. The conference room meeting had lasted 43 minutes. 43 minutes of medical hierarchy explaining to a rookie nurse why she was wrong, why she was dangerous, why she needed to understand her place. They hadn't fired her. Worse, they'd humiliated her with patience, as if she were a child who needed correction rather than dismissal. Melinda walked back to room 347 with her career hanging by a thread and her conviction somehow stronger. Sharon was alone, sitting by the window again, fingers tracing patterns on the armrest that only she could feel. "Hey," Melinda said quietly. "Hey yourself. You sound different. Bad different." Melinda sat down in the visitor's chair, and something about Sharon's easy honesty broke through her professional composure. They talked. Really talked. Sharon shared things she probably didn't tell the specialists. Her dreams of becoming a therapist, of helping other people navigate trauma the way she'd learned to navigate darkness. She talked about acceptance, about building a life that didn't require sight to have meaning. "I'm not waiting to be fixed anymore," Sharon said, her voice carrying a peace that felt both beautiful and heartbreaking. "I've watched my dad fight this war my whole life. At some point, you have to stop fighting what is and start living with what is. You know, Melinda didn't know. And sitting there, listening to this remarkable young woman describe a life she'd built from limitation, Melinda understood what was truly at stake. This wasn't about proving doctors wrong or validating a childhood memory. This was about Sharon Stone, about 18 years of unnecessary darkness, about dreams deferred because everyone assumed sight was impossible, about a future that could be completely different if one person had the courage to speak up. The door opened. General Stone entered, and the air in the room changed. He carried coffee, the ritual of a man who'd spent countless hours in hospital rooms. His eyes went to his daughter first, always first, then to Melinda. Melinda stood. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had settled in her chest, heavy and certain. General Stone, I need to tell you something. He set down the coffee slowly, his expression guarded. If this is about scheduling, it's about Sharon's eyes. About what I saw when I examined her. Sharon's head turned toward her, curious. The general's jaw tightened. Dr. Morrison already completed his evaluation. I don't need. Sir, your daughter has epiretinal membranes covering both retinas. The words came out clear and unwavering. Melinda didn't explain herself, didn't apologize, didn't hedge. She simply told him the truth exactly as she'd seen it. When I was 9 years old, she continued, I watched my mother treat a woman named Mrs. Henderson in our clinic in Georgia. She'd been going blind for months. The big hospital in Atlanta told her it was permanent. But my mother examined her eyes and saw a thin, cloudy layer, scar tissue that had formed on the retina's surface. An epiretinal membrane. It's like plastic wrap over a camera lens. Everything underneath works fine, but nothing can get through. The general hadn't moved. Sharon had gone completely still. My mother used a specialized instrument, a vitrectomy probe, to carefully peel away that membrane. The procedure took less than 30 minutes. And when Mrs. Henderson opened her eyes, she could see. Not perfectly at first, but clearly. She counted her fingers. She read the clock. She cried because she could see her own face in the mirror again. Melinda's voice didn't waver. Sharon has the exact same cloudy layer I saw on Mrs. Henderson's retinas. Both eyes. The optic nerves aren't the problem. They never were. There's just something blocking the light from reaching them. Something removable. General Stone looked at this rookie nurse, this 24-year-old who'd been at Walter Reed for less than one day. 73 specialists had failed. 18 years of searching had yielded nothing but disappointment. What could she possibly know that they didn't? But something in her eyes, it reminded him of his Marines before a dangerous mission. Absolute conviction. The kind of certainty that came not from arrogance, but from seeing something so clearly that doubt became impossible. 73 doctors examined my daughter, he said quietly. I know, sir. They all said it was impossible. I know. You've been a nurse for 6 weeks. Yes, sir. The general was silent for a long moment, and Melinda prepared herself for dismissal, for the same institutional resistance she'd faced in that conference room. She'd done what she could. She'd spoken the truth. That would have to be enough. Then General Stone asked one question. Just one, and it changed everything. What do you need? Melinda hadn't expected that response. Hadn't prepared for belief instead of dismissal. She'd been ready for a fight, not for a father desperate enough to listen. The hospital administrator's office on the 3rd floor had witnessed difficult conversations before, but nothing quite like the one that erupted 30 minutes after Melinda told General Stone what she'd seen. Administrator Helen Cross sat behind her desk, flanked by Dr. Kellerman and the hospital's chief legal counsel, facing a 4-star Marine general who'd walked in without an appointment and wasn't leaving without answers. I'm requesting that Nurse Harris be allowed to perform the procedure she's described, General Stone said, his voice carrying the command authority of 30 years in uniform. On my daughter. With my full consent. Helen Cross exchanged glances with Dr. Kellerman, her expression carefully diplomatic. General, I understand you're frustrated. I'm not frustrated. I'm demanding action. Dr. Kellerman leaned forward, his tone measured but firm. Sir, with all due respect, you're asking us to allow a rookie nurse with 0 surgical experience to perform a delicate intraocular procedure based on a childhood memory and a 5-minute examination. That's not medicine. That's recklessness. What's reckless is ignoring a potential diagnosis. There is no diagnosis. Kellerman's composure cracked slightly. Your daughter has been evaluated by 73 ophthalmologists. 73 independent confirmations of congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. That's not opinion, General. That's medical consensus. Consensus can be wrong. Consensus protects patients from exactly this kind of. Kellerman stopped himself, recalibrated. Let me be direct. If we allow an unqualified nurse to perform surgery and something goes wrong, if she causes bleeding, infection, retinal detachment, or any of a dozen possible complications, this hospital faces catastrophic liability. We face a lawsuit that could destroy careers and close departments. And your daughter faces consequences far worse than blindness. The legal counsel spoke up, her voice clinical and detached. General Stone, even with your consent, we cannot authorize a procedure that falls so far outside standard of care. The risk management implications alone. I don't care about your risk management. But we do, Helen Cross said gently. General, I have tremendous sympathy for your situation. But this hospital has protocols precisely to prevent harm. Dr. Kellerman is one of the most respected ophthalmologists in the country. Then let him examine her again. Let him look for what Nurse Harris saw. A heavy silence filled the room. Dr. Kellerman's jaw tightened, and something flickered across his face, something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. I already examined her, Kellerman said quietly. When, 7 years ago, I was specialist number 48. The air left the room. General Stone stared at the doctor with dawning understanding, and suddenly the resistance made terrible sense. You examined Sharon when she was 11 years old, the general said slowly. You spent 3 days running tests. You wrote a 30-page report confirming optic nerve hypoplasia. You told me there was no hope. Because there wasn't. There isn't. But Kellerman's voice had lost its certainty, replaced by something defensive. I performed a thorough examination. I reviewed every previous specialist's findings. I reached the only medically sound conclusion. Where you missed something. I didn't miss anything. The words came out sharp, almost angry. I have been practicing ophthalmology for 27 years. I have performed over 4,000 surgical procedures. I do not miss epiretinal membranes. And there it was. The real villain emerging from behind professional courtesy and medical protocol. This wasn't about medicine anymore. This was about ego. About 73 specialists who couldn't afford to be wrong. About a hospital's reputation. About everything except Sharon. If you believe ego should never stand between a patient and hope, hit that like button. Because what these doctors did next is exactly why we need to speak up against institutional arrogance. Comment, patients first, if you stand with Sharon. General Stone's voice dropped to something dangerously quiet. Let me be clear about what's going to happen. You will re-examine my daughter. You will look for what Nurse Harris described. And if you find it, you will treat it. If you refuse, I will transfer Sharon to Johns Hopkins today, and I will make sure every medical journal and news outlet knows that Walter Reed prevented a potential cure because of institutional pride. That's a threat, General. That's a promise. Helen Cross raised her hands, attempting de-escalation. Gentlemen, let's approach this reasonably. Dr. Kellerman, would you be willing to perform another examination? Simply to confirm or rule out Nurse Harris's observation. I don't need to confirm what I know to be. Would you be willing? Her tone made it clear this wasn't really a question. Kellerman's face hardened. Fine. I'll examine her again. And when I confirm that there are no membranes, that this is precisely what we've always known it to be, I expect this matter to be closed. Permanently. And I expect Nurse Harris to be removed from this case for inappropriately raising false hope with a vulnerable family. And if you're wrong, General Stone's voice cut like steel. The legal counsel interjected quickly. If new clinical findings emerge, we'll convene an appropriate medical team to discuss treatment options. But General, you must understand, even if membranes exist, allowing an inexperienced nurse to remove them is not an option this hospital can legally support. The standoff had reached an impasse. Legal threats on both sides. Institutional resistance meeting military authority. Reputation versus possibility. And somewhere in the middle, a young woman who'd been blind for 18 years while bureaucracy protected itself. And then Sharon herself walked into that office, guided by a nurse who'd clearly tried and failed to stop her, and everyone in the room fell silent. Sharon Stone stood in the doorway of the administrator's office, one hand resting lightly on the nurse's arm for orientation, her unseeing eyes directed toward the sound of voices that had gone suddenly, completely silent. She'd navigated the hallways of Walter Reed before. Knew the turns, the distances, the echo patterns that told her where walls ended and rooms began. But she'd never walked into a room with this kind of weight, this kind of expectation. "I heard my name," she said simply. "I thought I should be here." Her father moved toward her instinctively, protective, but Sharon raised her free hand slightly, a gesture they'd developed over 18 years that meant "I've got this." "Sharon, this is a complex medical discussion," Administrator Cross began, her voice careful. "We're trying to determine the best course for me," Sharon interrupted gently. "Which means I should probably have a say, don't you think?" This was the young woman who'd completed 3 semesters at Georgetown with a 3.9 GPA, who'd published an essay on disability and autonomy in her university's journal, who'd spent 18 years being discussed, evaluated, examined, and debated while rarely being asked what she actually wanted. Her independence wasn't just adaptation, it was identity. And standing there in that administrator's office, she reclaimed something that medical institutions often forget belongs to patients: their voice. "I've been listening outside for about 5 minutes," Sharon continued, turning her head slightly toward where she'd heard Dr. Kellerman's voice. "And unless I'm misunderstanding, this conversation is about whether I should be allowed to try a procedure that might restore my vision. Is that accurate?" "It's more complicated than," Kellerman started. "Is that accurate?" "Yes," General Stone said quietly. Sharon nodded once, absorbing this, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a clarity that made every objection, every protocol, every institutional concern seem suddenly small. "Then here's what I know. I've been blind for 18 years. I've been examined by 73 specialists. I've heard impossible in more languages than most people can name. I've built a good life, a full life. But if there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility, that someone finally saw what everyone else missed, then I want to try." "Sharon, the risks," Administrator Cross attempted. "I understand risks. I live with risk every single day. Every time I cross a street, every time I trust someone to describe what's in front of me, every time I navigate a world designed for people who can see. This is my risk to take." Dr. Kellerman leaned forward, his professional tone trying to reassert control. "Miss Stone, you're young. You don't fully comprehend the potential complications. Retinal detachment, infection, permanent damage beyond what? Beyond blindness?" Sharon's voice remained calm, but carried an edge now. "Doctor, I'm already blind. I've been blind since the day I was born. What exactly am I risking that I haven't already lost?" The room absorbed that question in silence. Sharon turned toward where she'd last heard Melinda's voice during the hallway conversation that had preceded this meeting. "Melinda told my father what she saw. She risked her job to speak up. She didn't have to do that. She could have stayed quiet, finished her shift, protected her career. But she chose to trust what she saw over what she was told to believe. That kind of courage deserves my trust." She stood there, 18 years old, legally blind, and said 7 words that silenced an entire room. "I'd rather try than always wonder." Administrator Cross exchanged long looks with the legal counsel, with Dr. Kellerman, with the general. Calculations were happening: liability versus autonomy, protocol versus patient rights, institutional protection versus basic human dignity. "If we proceed," the legal counsel said carefully, "we'll need comprehensive waivers, acknowledgement of risks, documentation that this is entirely the patient's informed choice against medical advice." "I'll sign anything," Sharon said immediately. "And the procedure cannot be performed by Nurse Harris," Kellerman added, his voice tight. "If membranes exist, then a qualified surgeon with proper credentials will remove them. That's non-negotiable." General Stone started to object, but Sharon spoke first. "That's fair. As long as someone actually looks. As long as someone checks." 30 minutes later, papers were signed. Liability waivers with language so dire that the legal counsel insisted on reading each clause aloud. Acknowledgement of risks including permanent blindness, infection, retinal detachment, loss of the eye itself. Sharon signed them all with her father's hand guiding hers to the signature line, her fingers finding the braille markers the hospital had hastily added. Dr. Kellerman agreed, under duress and with visible resentment, to perform a comprehensive re-examination the following morning. If membranes were found, he would convene a surgical team. The procedure would happen within 24 hours of confirmation. Melinda stood in the corner of that office, watching this unfold with a mixture of relief and dawning terror. They'd believed her, or at least, they'd believed Sharon's right to pursue what Melinda had seen. But now the pressure shifted entirely. She'd started something she couldn't finish. She'd seen something that would now be verified or disproven by someone with 27 years of experience and every reason to prove her wrong. And if she was right, if membranes actually existed, then she'd just set in motion a surgery that would determine whether Sharon Stone spent the rest of her life in darkness or light. Now she actually had to be right. The meeting ended. Sharon left with her father, her hand on his arm, her posture straight with something that looked like hope. Dr. Kellerman left without acknowledging Melinda, his footsteps sharp and angry against the tile floor. Administrator Cross reminded everyone about confidentiality, about the sensitivity of the situation, about the need for discretion. And Melinda walked out of that office knowing she had less than one day to prepare for the most important moment of her brief career. Less than one day before someone would look at Sharon's eyes with professional expertise and either confirm Melinda's observation or destroy her credibility forever. 24 hours. That's all the time she had. The clock was already ticking. The medical library at Walter Reed stayed open until midnight, and Melinda Harris was still there at 11:47. Surrounded by ophthalmology textbooks she'd pulled from shelves with trembling hands. Epiretinal membrane, macular pucker, vitrectomy techniques, surgical complications. The words blurred together under fluorescent lights that made everything feel both too bright and not bright enough. She wasn't performing the surgery, Dr. Kellerman had made that brutally clear. But she needed to understand every detail, every risk, every possible outcome. Because if he found those membranes tomorrow morning, if her observation proved correct, then Sharon's future depended on a procedure Melinda had only witnessed once, 15 years ago, through a crack in a door. The technical literature was unforgiving. Epiretinal membrane removal required a vitrectomy. Surgical removal of the vitreous gel filling the eye, followed by careful peeling of the membrane from the retinal surface using microscopic instruments. Success rates were high in experienced hands. Complication rates increased dramatically with bilateral procedures, with younger patients, with membranes that had existed for years. Sharon was 18. The membranes, if they existed, had been there since birth. No surgeon had attempted this kind of case before because no one had diagnosed it before. If Melinda was wrong, if she'd misidentified normal anatomy, if her childhood memory had distorted reality into false hope, then tomorrow morning, Dr. Kellerman would examine Sharon, find nothing, and Melinda's career would end before it began. And if she was right, but the surgery failed. Her phone rang at 10 past midnight. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, Dr. Sarah Harris, the rural Georgia doctor who'd somehow known Melinda would need to hear her voice tonight. Baby girl. Her mother's warm drawl came through, familiar and grounding. I heard you had quite a day. Melinda's composure cracked. Mama, I think I made a terrible mistake. Tell me. So Melinda told her everything. The examination, the membranes she'd seen, the meeting, Sharon's courage, Dr. Kellerman's expertise and resentment, the surgery scheduled for tomorrow when. The diagnosis was confirmed. And underneath it all, the fear that maybe she'd seen what she wanted to see rather than what was actually there. Her mother listened without interrupting, the way she'd always listened, and when Melinda finally stopped talking, Sarah Harris was quiet for a long moment. You remember Mrs. Henderson? She finally said. Of course. That's why You remember what I told you afterward? When you asked me how I knew what to do. Melinda closed her eyes, reaching back through 15 years. You said sometimes you have to trust what you see over what you're told you should see. That's right. But I didn't tell you the rest. Her mother's voice softened. I'd sent Mrs. Henderson to Emory 2 months before I treated her. Big fancy hospital in Atlanta. They told her she was going blind from macular degeneration. Incurable, they said. Permanent. And I almost believed them. Almost let their expertise override my own eyes. But when I examined her myself, I saw that membrane clear as day, and I had to choose, trust my training or trust their reputation. You chose your training. I chose what I could see. And baby, if you saw membranes on that girl's retinas, then you saw them. Trust that. Whatever happens tomorrow, trust what you saw. They talked for another 20 minutes, her mother walking her through the procedure she remembered, confirming details, offering the kind of steady confidence that only comes from someone who's made hard calls and lived with the consequences. When they finally said goodnight, Melinda felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty exactly, but the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done the right thing regardless of outcome. That night, Melinda didn't sleep. She lay in her apartment staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as cars passed outside. She wasn't thinking about the 73 specialists she might prove wrong. She wasn't thinking about her career or her credibility or even her own vindication. She was thinking about Sharon. About 18 years of darkness. About a young woman who'd said, "I'd rather try than always wonder," with such clear-eyed courage that it made Melinda's breath catch just remembering it. Whatever happened tomorrow, Sharon deserved someone who'd fight for her, who'd risk everything to give her a chance, who'd see what others missed and refuse to stay quiet. Melinda could be that person, would be that person, even if it cost her everything. At 6 a.m., Melinda walked into Walter Reed Medical Center wearing fresh scrubs and carrying determination like armor. At 6:15, she walked into Sharon's room where the young woman sat waiting, her father beside her, both of them wearing the careful composure of people preparing for hope or heartbreak. At 6:30, Dr. Kellerman arrived with his surgical team, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes still carrying yesterday's resentment. The examination began. Melinda stood in the corner, hands clasped to keep them from shaking, watching as Dr. Kellerman positioned the ophthalmoscope, as Sharon held perfectly still, as the general stopped breathing. And at 6:31, something went wrong. Sharon's heart rate spiked to 142 beats per minute the moment Dr. Kellerman touched the ophthalmoscope to her eye. The monitor's alarm cut through the examination room with shrill urgency, and the general moved forward instinctively before the attending nurse raised a hand to stop him. Sharon's breathing had gone shallow and rapid, her hands gripping the chair's armrests with white-knuckled intensity. "I can't. I need a minute," Sharon's voice cracked, 18 years of composure fracturing under the weight of what this moment meant. Dr. Kellerman pulled back, professional concern replacing his earlier resentment. But it was Melinda who moved to Sharon's side, kneeling so her voice came from the right level, close and grounding. "Hey, Sharon, it's me. Listen to my voice." Melinda's tone carried the same steadiness her mother had given her last night. "Your heart is racing because you're scared. That's okay. That's normal. But I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose, 4 counts. Hold it. Out through your mouth, 6 counts. With me now." They breathed together. Sharon's fingers found Melinda's hand and squeezed hard enough to hurt, and Melinda squeezed back, anchoring her through the panic. The monitor's alarm quieted as Sharon's heart rate dropped. 138, 129, 114, finally settling into the low 90s. "I'm right here," Melinda whispered. "Whatever happens, I'm right here." Sharon nodded, released Melinda's hand, and turned her face back toward Dr. Kellerman with visible effort. "Okay, I'm ready." Dr. Kellerman resumed his examination with methodical precision, and Melinda watched his face for any sign of what he was seeing. His expression remained neutral for the first 30 seconds. Then something shifted. A slight widening of his eyes, a pause in his breathing, a stillness that spoke louder than words. He moved to Sharon's left eye. The same pause, the same stillness. When he finally pulled back and set down the ophthalmoscope, his voice carried the careful neutrality of a man confronting something he desperately didn't want to admit. "There are membranes," he said quietly. "Bilateral epiretinal membranes. Extensive. Long-standing." He looked at Melinda for the first time since yesterday's confrontation, and in his eyes she saw something complex. Professional respect grudgingly given, personal frustration at being wrong, and beneath it all, the weight of 18 years of misdiagnosis. Nurse Harris was correct. The surgery was scheduled for that afternoon. Dr. Kellerman assembled a team, 2 surgical nurses, an anesthesiologist, a resident observer. Sharon would be under local anesthesia, conscious but sedated, eyes numbed but mind aware. The procedure would take approximately 40 minutes per eye if everything went smoothly. Melinda wasn't allowed in the operating room, but she stood in the observation gallery with General Stone, both of them watching through glass as Sharon was positioned under surgical lights that made her look impossibly small and vulnerable. Dr. Kellerman's voice came through the speaker system, clinical and focused. "Beginning vitrectomy on right eye." removing vitreous gel to access the membrane. The procedure unfolded with mechanical precision. Tiny instruments entering Sharon's eye through incisions barely visible from the gallery. The membrane itself appeared on the overhead monitor, a translucent layer that had robbed Sharon of 18 years of sight, now magnified to fill a screen, undeniable and removable. Initiating membrane peeling, Dr. Kellerman's voice continued. Starting at the superior edge. Slow, steady pressure. Minutes stretched into eternities. The general stood motionless beside Melinda, his breathing the only sign he was still alive. On the monitor, the membrane began to separate from the retinal surface with agonizing slowness, Kellerman's instruments working with the kind of delicate precision that defined excellence. Membrane is free. Removing now. The translucent tissue came away complete and intact, and even through the speaker system, Melinda heard the collective exhale from the surgical team. Perfect removal. Textbook procedure. They repeated the process on Sharon's left eye. Same precision. Same careful peeling. Same successful extraction. When Kellerman finally stepped back and said, "Procedure complete." Both membranes successfully removed with no complications. Melinda felt something in her chest release after holding tension for what felt like a lifetime. But Sharon's eyes were still closed. Bandages were applied. Instructions given. Sharon was moved to recovery with her father at her side, and Melinda followed, waiting for the moment that would confirm whether 18 years of darkness could truly end this simply. For hours later, when the anesthesia had worn off and the initial healing had begun, Dr. Kellerman returned to remove the bandages. Sharon sat in her recovery bed, her father holding her hand, Melinda standing in the corner, trying not to hope too hard. "Sharon," Kellerman said gently, "I'm going to remove your bandages now. When I do, I want you to slowly open your eyes. Don't force anything. Just let them open naturally." The bandages came away. First right eye, then left. Sharon's eyelids remained closed, and seconds passed in absolute silence. "You can open them now," Kellerman said. "Nothing happened." "Sharon," the general's voice carried concern. "Sweetheart, open your eyes." Still nothing. Sharon's face had gone pale, her breathing shallow again, and Melinda suddenly understood with terrible clarity what was happening. This wasn't medical failure. This wasn't surgical complication. This was fear. Sharon's voice came out barely above a whisper. "What if I still can't see? What if I open them and there's still nothing? What if hoping was worse than accepting?" Her hands trembled in her lap. "I've been blind my whole life. I've made peace with that. But if I open my eyes now and there's still just darkness, I don't know if I can survive that kind of disappointment." The general started to respond, but Melinda moved forward, kneeling beside Sharon's bed the same way she'd knelt during the panic attack, bringing her voice close and grounding. "Sharon, do you remember what you told me yesterday? In your room, before everything happened?" Sharon's closed eyes turned toward Melinda's voice. "I said a lot of things. You said you'd rather try than always wonder." Melinda's voice stayed soft but certain. "You've already been brave enough to try. Now you just have to be brave enough to know. And whatever happens, whether you see or you don't, I'm right here with you. Your dad's right here. You're not alone in this." Sharon's breathing steadied slightly. Her hands unclenched. "I'm right here with you," Melinda repeated. "Whatever comes next, we're right here." And slowly, trembling with 18 years of longing and terror, Sharon Stone began to open her eyes. Sharon's eyelids lifted slowly, incrementally, the way dawn breaks over distant horizons. Inevitable, but achingly gradual. Her lashes separated. Light entered pupils that had never processed visual information before. And for 3 heartbeats, nothing changed in her expression. No recognition. No reaction. Just the mechanical act of opening eyes that had been closed for 18 years. Then her breath caught. Sharon's voice fractured. "It's not dark." The words came out confused, disbelieving, as if darkness was the only reality she'd ever trusted, and this new sensation defied everything she understood about existence. Her eyes moved slightly, unfocused but searching, and Melinda watched realization dawn across Sharon's face with the kind of wonder that made the entire room hold its breath. "I see light," Sharon whispered. "Actual light. Not the idea of light or someone describing light, but, oh my God, I can see light." Melinda's own eyes filled with tears. She hadn't given herself permission to cry until this moment. "It's going to be blurry at first," she said, her voice unsteady. Your brain has to learn how to process what your eyes are sending. But Sharon, you're seeing. You're actually seeing. I'm terrified, Sharon admitted, her voice small and honest. What if this is temporary? What if I wake up tomorrow and it's gone? Melinda knelt closer, her own vulnerability rising to meet Sharon's. You want to know the truth? I'm terrified too. I've been terrified since the moment I saw those membranes. Terrified I was wrong. Terrified I'd fail you. Terrified I'd give you hope and then destroy it. Her voice cracked. But being terrified and being brave aren't opposites, Sharon. Sometimes they're the exact same thing. So let's be terrified together and see what happens next. Sharon's unfocused eyes turned toward Melinda's voice, and something in her expression shifted from fear toward determination. She blinked slowly, deliberately, and with each blink the world seemed to sharpen incrementally in her vision. There are shapes, Sharon breathed. Blurry shapes. Something tall to my right. Is that a person? That's your father, Melinda said softly. Sharon turned her head slowly toward where General Stone stood frozen, his hand still holding hers, but his entire body rigid with the kind of hope that hurt to carry. Sharon blinked again, her eyes adjusting, her brain frantically building neural pathways that should have formed in infancy, but were constructing themselves now in real-time desperation. The shapes are getting clearer, Sharon said, wonder bleeding into her voice. I can see edges. Definition. There's a face. I can see a face. Her voice rose slightly, excitement overriding fear. Dad, I can see your face. It's blurry, but it's there. You're there. General Marcus Stone, who'd commanded Marines through combat, who'd made life-and-death decisions without flinching, who'd maintained composure through 18 years of medical disappointments, made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. His free hand covered his mouth, his shoulders shook, and tears he'd been holding for nearly 2 decades finally broke free. Sharon's vision continued sharpening. Blurs became shapes. Shapes became features. Features became the face of a man she'd only known through touch and sound, and the particular quality of his presence in a room. You have gray hair at your temples, Sharon said, her voice filled with awe, and lines around your eyes. And your mouth is, Dad, you're smiling. I can see you smiling. Her own tears started then, streaming down her face as she reached up with trembling fingers to touch her father's cheek, while actually seeing her hand move through space. You look exactly how you sound. Strong and tired and, Dad, I can see you. The general dropped to his knees beside her bed, his forehead pressing against their joined hands, and 18 years of war finally ended in the smallest, most profound victory imaginable. His daughter could see his face. After 73 specialists, after millions of dollars, after flying to 12 countries and consulting every expert who mattered, it took a rookie nurse with a childhood memory to end his longest battle. Dr. Kellerman stood motionless by the door, his professional composure barely containing something that looked like shame. The surgical nurses who'd assisted weren't even trying to hide their tears. The resident observer had her hand over her mouth, witnessing the kind of medical moment that would define why she'd chosen this profession. Sharon looked around the room now, her vision still adjusting but functional, seeing colors and faces and the mundane miracle of visual reality for the first time in her conscious memory. She saw the hospital equipment, the flowers someone had brought, the way light filtered through window blinds creating patterns she'd never imagined. Everything is so much, Sharon said, overwhelmed and laughing through tears. So much color and detail. And, Melinda, where are you? Melinda stepped forward into Sharon's line of sight, and Sharon's face transformed with recognition. You're younger than I thought, and you have kind eyes. I can see that your eyes are kind. She reached out, and Melinda took her hand, and 2 young women who'd changed each other's lives held on to each other while the world tilted into something new. If watching this proves that courage beats credentials, that intuition matters, that one person can make a difference, subscribe right now. Share this story, because Melinda's fight isn't over, and neither is ours. Comment, one person matters if this moved you. The room stayed suspended in that moment, nobody wanting to break the spell of witnessing something impossibly beautiful. Dr. Kellerman finally spoke, his voice professionally controlled, but carrying unmistakable emotion. Sharon, your vision will continue improving over the next several weeks as your brain adapts. You'll need follow-up appointments, possibly corrective lenses, time to adjust. But what you're seeing now, it's real. It's permanent. Sharon nodded, still looking around with childlike wonder, still processing that darkness wasn't her permanent reality anymore. And in that hospital room, surrounded by people who'd doubted and people who'd believed and people who'd been proven spectacularly wrong, institutional pride finally gave way to human decency. One person had mattered. One rookie nurse had seen what 73 specialists missed. One act of courage had defeated 18 years of institutional certainty. And Sharon Stone, who'd spent her entire life in darkness, could finally see the light. Administrator Helen Cross delivered the hospital's official statement 48 hours after Sharon opened her eyes, standing in a conference room with carefully chosen words that acknowledged success while avoiding the word mistake. The hospital was pleased with the positive outcome, grateful for the collaborative efforts of the medical team, committed to reviewing protocols to ensure comprehensive diagnostics in complex cases. All the institutional language that said everything and nothing simultaneously. But what the statement didn't say, what everyone in that building understood, was that Walter Reed Medical Center had missed a diagnosis for 18 years. That 73 specialists had looked at the same eyes and seen only what they expected to see. That protocol and expertise and reputation had failed where fresh perspective and courage had succeeded. The medical review began immediately. A committee pulled every examination report, every scan, every specialist's notes from Sharon's file, and searched for how this had happened. And there, buried in specialist number 12's report from 9 years ago, was a single sentence. Mild vitreous opacification noted, consistent with patient's congenital condition. The cloudy layer had been seen, documented, and dismissed as irrelevant rather than investigated as significant. 73 specialists. Millions of dollars. 18 years. And it took one rookie nurse with a childhood memory to see what they all missed. Not because she was smarter, not because she had better training, but because she was willing to look at what was there instead of what she'd been told should be there. Dr. Kellerman found Melinda in the staff lounge 3 days after the surgery, sitting alone with coffee she wasn't drinking. He didn't sit immediately, just stood in the doorway with the posture of a man who'd been rehearsing words he didn't want to say. "May I?" he finally asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. Melinda nodded, uncertain. Kellerman sat, silent for a long moment, his hands folded on the table with careful precision. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the condescension from their first meeting, just exhaustion and something that might have been humility. "I examined Sharon when she was 11 years old," he said quietly. "I spent 3 days running tests. I was thorough, I was confident, and I was wrong." He looked at Melinda directly. "I saw what I expected to see. Optic nerve hypoplasia. The diagnosis was already established by 47 specialists before me. So when I looked at her retinas, I saw a confirmation of what I already knew rather than questioning whether I actually knew it." Melinda stayed quiet, letting him work through whatever he'd come to say. "You looked without expectations," Kellerman continued. "You saw what was actually there. That's not luck. That's good medicine." He paused, the admission clearly costing him something. "I dismissed you because you threatened my certainty, my reputation, my need to be right. And in doing so, I almost prevented a miracle." He extended his hand across the table. "You were right to persist. I was wrong to shut you down. I'm sorry." The apology wasn't complete. It carried the complicated layers of a man confronting his own fallibility, but it was genuine. Melinda shook his hand, and something in the gesture felt like the institutional hierarchy acknowledging that credentials weren't the only measure of medical competence. General Stone found Melinda that same afternoon, still in uniform but carrying himself with different energy, lighter somehow, as if 18 years of weight had lifted from his shoulders. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I want to sponsor your education," he said directly. "Whatever specialty you choose, whatever advanced training you need, I'll cover it. No strings, no expectations, just gratitude for giving me back my daughter." Melinda started to protest, but the general raised a hand. "You risked everything for Sharon. Your career, your credibility, your future. You stood up to an entire institution because you trusted what you saw. That kind of integrity deserves support." She accepted, though the conversation felt surreal. 6 days ago, she'd been a rookie nurse trying to survive her first shift, and now a 4-star general was offering to fund her future. But more than the financial support, it was the recognition that mattered. The acknowledgement that she'd done something that mattered. That one person's courage could genuinely change a life. Patricia Monroe, the senior nurse who dismissed Melinda on day one, approached her in the hallway with an expression somewhere between chagrin and respect. "You were right," she said simply. "I told you to stay in your lane. I was wrong. This place needs more nurses willing to drive outside their lane when it matters." The shift was palpable. Other nurses asked Melinda questions about the case, treating her observations with respect rather than dismissal. Doctors nodded to her in hallways. The rookie who'd been invisible was suddenly seen, not because she'd demanded attention, but because she'd earned it through the simplest, hardest act in medicine, speaking truth even when no one wanted to hear it. Sharon's first week of vision unfolded like time-lapse photography of a life transforming in real time. She saw sunrise through her bedroom window, actual sunrise, not the concept of it, and cried at the colors. She saw her father's military medals hanging in his study and traced them with her fingers while actually watching her hands move. She saw her own reflection for the first time and laughed because she looked exactly how she'd imagined, but also completely different. The morning routine Melinda had witnessed that first day, Sharon navigating by sound and memory, transformed into something new. Sharon still made coffee at 0600 hours, but now she watched it brew, saw the steam rise, observed the precise moment when the pot signaled completion. Her father still descended those 13 stairs, but now Sharon saw him coming, saw his face light up when their eyes met, saw the daily miracle of being seen and seeing in return. She touched everything now. Not because she needed to for orientation, but because combining touch with sight created understanding. Her brain was frantically cataloging. This is blue. This is rough. This is how shadows work. This is what faces do when they smile. The world was overwhelming and beautiful and sometimes frightening in its complexity, but Sharon navigated it with the same intelligence and grace she'd brought to navigating darkness. Just now, she had more information, more tools, more possibilities for a future that had suddenly expanded beyond every limitation she'd accepted as permanent. And every time Melinda visited Sharon's room, every time they talked about recovery or adjustment or the overwhelming gift of sight, Sharon said the same thing. "Thank you for being brave enough to see me." Justice had arrived quietly, wearing scrubs and carrying a childhood memory. Vindication came not through grand gestures, but through one young woman opening her eyes and counting her fingers and reading the numbers on a wall clock. And new beginnings bloomed in a hospital room where darkness had finally, irrevocably, ended. 6 months after Sharon Stone opened her eyes for the first time, she sat in a Georgetown University lecture hall taking notes in her own handwriting. Something she'd never imagined doing when she'd started that psychology degree, navigating by audio recordings and braille. Her vision had stabilized at 20/30 with corrective lenses, better than many people born with sight. She'd added a pre-med track to her coursework. Medical school applications sat on her desk at home, and when people asked why she wanted to become a doctor, she had a simple answer: because I understand what it's like when doctors stop looking. She'd become an unexpected advocate for diagnostic humility, speaking at medical conferences about her case, about the specialists who'd missed what mattered, about the nurse who'd seen what others overlooked. Her story was becoming required reading in teaching hospitals, a cautionary tale about the dangers of diagnostic certainty and the importance of fresh perspective. Melinda Harris, no longer a rookie nurse but still carrying the same instinct that had changed Sharon's life, had been appointed to Walter Reed's new diagnostic review committee. Her job was simple but revolutionary: question established diagnoses when something didn't fit, encourage staff to trust observations over assumptions, create space for junior medical personnel to speak up without fear of institutional retaliation. The hospital had learned an expensive lesson about the cost of hierarchy, and Melinda was helping ensure that lesson actually changed practice rather than just generating paperwork. She'd started advanced training in ophthalmological nursing, funded by General Stone Scholarship, studying under specialists who now treated her observations with respect. Some of the same doctors who dismissed her 6 months ago now asked for her input on complex cases, recognizing that competence isn't always correlated with years of experience. The general himself had written a letter to Dr. Sarah Harris in rural Georgia, a handwritten letter on military stationery that arrived one Tuesday afternoon at her small clinic. In it, He thanked her for raising a daughter with the courage to trust her own eyes, for teaching Melinda that simple solutions sometimes hide behind complicated diagnoses, for the childhood lesson that had given his own daughter a future neither of them had dared to hope for. He ended with a single line that Dr. Harris framed and hung in her examination room. "Your daughter gave me mine back. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful." But the story's impact reached beyond 3 transformed lives. Medical journals published analyses of Sharon's case, questioning how 73 specialists had missed epiretinal membranes and what systemic factors contributed to diagnostic blind spots. Teaching hospitals revised protocols. Nursing schools added case studies about advocating for patients even when it challenges authority. And somewhere, in examination rooms across the country, other rookie nurses were learning to trust what they saw instead of deferring automatically to expertise. Because Sharon's story wasn't really about blindness and sight. It was about systems that stop questioning, about expertise that becomes obstacle, about the courage required to speak truth when institutions prefer silence. It was about one person who decided that being right mattered more than being safe, that a patient's future mattered more than a career, that some risks are worth taking even when the odds are stacked against you. Sharon's story reminds us that expertise isn't everything. That fresh eyes see what familiar ones miss. That courage to speak up can change lives. If this story impacted you, don't just watch ACT. Subscribe to see more stories where one person's bravery beats the system. Like if you believe in second chances. Comment your own story of being underestimated and proving them wrong. Because every time you engage, you're telling platforms to show stories that matter, not just stories that trend. You're standing with the Melindas and Sharons of the world. Will you? The morning routine that had defined Sharon's first 18 years. Coffee at 0600, her father's footsteps on 13 stairs, navigating a world shaped by sound and touch, had transformed into something new. Now Sharon saw the sunrise that accompanied her coffee, saw her father's face when he descended those stairs, saw the world she'd built from limitation expand into possibility. She still touched things constantly, combining sensation with sight, her brain forever integrating 2 ways of knowing into one complete understanding. But the darkness that had defined her existence, that had been her permanent reality, her accepted limitation, her adapted normal, that darkness was gone, and in its place was light, color, vision, future, not because of millions of dollars spent on specialists, not because of cutting-edge research or experimental therapies, but because one 24-year-old nurse, 6 weeks out of school, looked at what was actually there instead of what she was told should be there. Because Melinda Harris decided that speaking up was worth the risk of being wrong, that a patient's hope mattered more than her own comfort, that some battles are worth fighting even when the entire institution tells you to stand down. General Marcus Stone had fought for 18 years to win a war everyone said was unwinnable. In the end, he didn't win it through military strategy or unlimited resources or sheer determination. He won it because one person was brave enough to see what others had missed and courageous enough to say so. Sharon Stone counted 18 years in darkness, but she'll count the rest of her life in light. Because one nurse decided that being right was worth risking everything. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life forever. One person, one moment, one choice to speak when silence would have been easier. The question isn't whether you have the expertise or the credentials or the authority to make a difference. The question is whether you have the courage.